You think you can drag my name through the mud and I'll just sit here and smile, Jimmy? You're a damn fool if you believe that. Harrison Ford's voice boomed across the stage, his eyes blazing with a fury that silenced the audience's nervous laughter. The air crackled with hostility, the kind that makes your skin prickle as if the room itself knew a storm was brewing. Jimmy Kimmel, perched behind his desk with that smug grin plastered on his face, leaned back, unfazed, twirling a pen like he was toying with a loaded gun. What was this? A talk show or a battlefield? The crowd, expecting lighthearted banter about Ford's latest film, sat frozen, caught in the crossfire of two men who'd clearly forgotten the cameras were rolling. Oh, but this wasn't about movies. Not anymore. This was personal, raw, and ready to explode. Why, you ask, would a legend like Harrison Ford, a man who's faced down Nazis and space smugglers on screen, be ready to tear into a late-night host? It all came down to a single vicious jab Kimmel made weeks ago, one Ford hadn't forgotten. A cruel mockery of Ford's private life, his quiet marriage to Calista Flockhart, twisted into a cheap punchline about age and gold digging. Ford, a man who guards his personal world like a fortress, had been seething ever since, and tonight he wasn't here to play nice. Is there anything more infuriating than a smug host who thinks he can sling insults without consequence? Kimmel, with his slick suit and sharper tongue, had poked the wrong bear, and now that bear was ready to roar. The show had started innocently enough, or so it seemed. Ford strode out, his weathered face carrying that iconic scowl, the one that made Han Solo and Indiana Jones legends. The audience cheered, expecting stories of Hollywood glory. Kimmel, though, had other plans. He opened with a smirk, tossing out a barbed comment about Ford's ancient career, hinting at retirement with a venom that felt personal. Ford's jaw tightened, but he let it slide, answering questions about his new thriller with clipped professional responses. The crowd sensed the tension, their applause hesitant, like they were waiting for a fuse to light. Then Kimmel, never one to quit while he's ahead, leaned forward, his eyes glinting with mischief. So, Harrison, tell us, does Calista ever get tired of changing your diapers now that you're pushing 80? The audience gasped, a few nervous chuckles breaking the silence. Ford's face turned to stone, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. You want to talk about my wife, Jimmy? He growled, his voice low and dangerous. You sure you want to go there? Kimmel laughed, waving it off, but the crowd wasn't laughing anymore. They could feel it. The air shifting, the temperature rising. Ford wasn't here for jokes. He was here for blood. Kimmel, sensing he'd struck a nerve, doubled down, because that's what cowards do when they think they're untouchable. Oh, come on, Harrison, lighten up. It's just a bit of fun. Callista's a saint for putting up with you, right? The audience squirmed, sensing the line had been crossed. Ford leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Kimmel's like a predator sizing up prey. Fun? You call humiliating my family fun? You're a small man, Jimmy, hiding behind your desk, thinking you're clever. Say it again. I dare you. The crowd held its breath, the silence deafening. Kimmel, for once, faltered, his grin slipping, but he couldn't resist the spotlight. All right, tough guy, he sneered. Maybe if you didn't marry someone half your age, people wouldn't talk. That was it. The spark that lit the powder keg. Ford shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and pointed, a finger at Kimmel. You don't know a damn thing about my life, you little weasel. You want to make this personal? Let's make it personal. The audience erupted in gasps, some cheering, others stunned, as Ford towered over the desk, his presence commanding, unyielding. Kimmel, still trying to play it cool, leaned back further, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. He'd pushed too far, and now Harrison Ford was done playing nice. The stage was set for a showdown, and nobody was changing the channel. Harrison. Ford loomed over Jimmy Kimmel's desk, his fingers still pointed like a loaded weapon. his voice a low growl that sent shivers through the audience. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? Hiding behind your cheap jokes, your fake laugh, your little kingdom here." The crowd was a sea of wide eyes and open mouths, caught in the grip of a moment that felt too raw for television. Kimmel, his smirk now a thin, shaky line, tried to regain control, his hands fidgeting with the pen he'd been twirling moments ago. "Harrison, come on, sit down, it's just a show," he said, his voice tinged with a nervous edge that betrayed his bravado. But Ford wasn't having it. He took a step closer, his boots heavy on the polished stage floor, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. "A show? This ain't a show, Jimmy. This is you crossing a line you can't uncross. You don't get to spit on my life and call it entertainment." The audience leaned forward, some clutching their armrests, others whispering to their neighbors, as the tension coiled tighter. Kimmel, sensing the crowd's unease, tried to pivot, his usual charm replaced by a desperate scramble to save face. "Look, Harrison, I didn't mean anything by it. Just trying to keep things lively, you know?" His words sounded hollow, a weak attempt to dodge the fire he'd ignited. Ford's eyes narrowed, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Lively? You call dragging my wife's name through your gutter lively? You're not a comedian, Jimmy. You're a bully, with a microphone." The crowd erupted in a mix of cheers and gasps, some clapping for Ford's defiance, others stunned by the raw venom in his words. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, her eyes darting between the two men as if she expected fists to fly. Kimmel, his face flushing red, couldn't let it go. He leaned forward, his voice sharper now, dripping with defiance. "A bully? That's rich, coming from the guy who plays tough guys for a living. Maybe if you didn't act like you're still Indiana Jones, people wouldn't take shots at you." The jab landed like a punch, and the audience sucked in a collective breath, waiting for Ford's response. Ford's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white, but he didn't swing. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that carried to every corner of the studio. "You don't know what tough is, Jimmy. You sit here, night after night, tearing people down to feel big. I've faced real fights, real loss, real life. You're just a loudmouth who's never had to answer for anything." The crowd roared, some shouting Ford's name, others yelling at Kimmel to back off. The energy in the room was electric, a live wire ready to spark. Kimmel, cornered and visibly rattled, made a fatal mistake. He stood up trying to match Ford's intensity, but his shorter frame and nervous posture only made him look smaller. "Oh, please, Harrison, spare us the hero act. You're just mad because I told the truth about your midlife crisis marriage." The audience groaned, the air thick with disapproval. Ford's face darkened, his eyes burning with a fury that made even the crew freeze. He stepped around the desk, closing the gap between them, his voice steady but laced with menace. "Say one more word about her, Jimmy. One more. See what happens." The crowd was on its feet now, some cheering Ford, others shouting for calm, but nobody could look away. Kimmel, for the first time, seemed to realize he was in over his head, his eyes flickering to the producers offstage, silently begging for a commercial break that wasn't coming. Ford stood his ground, unyielding, a man who'd had enough and wasn't backing down. The stage felt like a powder keg, and everyone knew the next move would light the fuse. The studio felt like it was holding its breath, every eye locked on Harrison Ford as he stood nose to nose with Jimmy Kimmel, his challenge hanging in the air like a drawn blade. "Go on, Jimmy, say it. One more word." Ford's voice was a low rumble, each syllable dripping with barely restrained rage. Kimmel, his face pale but his ego still driving, opened his mouth, then hesitated, his eyes darting to the crowd for support that wasn't there. The audience, a mix of shocked faces and clenched fists, was no longer his cheering section. They were Ford's army now, their murmurs buzzing with anticipation. Kimmel's producer, visible just off stage, waved frantically, signaling for a cut, But the cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of this unraveling disaster. Ford's presence was a force. His broad shoulders squared, his gaze unrelenting, like a man who'd faced down worse than a late-night host and walked away unscathed. Kimmel, cornered and desperate, tried to claw his way back. "You're making a fool of yourself, Harrison," he snapped, his voice cracking under the strain. "This is my show, and you don't get to come in here and play tough guy. Sit down or get out." The crowd booed, a wave of disapproval crashing over him. But Kimmel doubled down, his pride refusing to yield. "What, you gonna hit me, big man Harrison Ford, throwing punches to defend his trophy wife?" The words were a mistake, a reckless swing that landed like gasoline on a fire. Ford's eyes flashed, and for a moment it looked like he might actually lunge. Instead, he stepped back, not in retreat, but in calculation, his voice cutting sharper than any fist. "You're pathetic, Jimmy. You don't fight fair, do you? You hide behind your desk, your jokes, your audience, thinking it makes you safe. But you're not safe. Not tonight." The crowd roared, some standing, others shouting Ford's name like a battle cry. A man in the back yelled, "Get him, Harrison!" while a woman nearby screamed, "Shut up, Kimmel!" The studio was chaos, a living thing feeding off Ford's defiance. Kimmel, his face now a mix of anger and panic, tried to pivot to humor, his go-to weapon. "Wow, Harrison, didn't know you were this sensitive. Maybe we should get Calista out here to calm you down." The crowd hissed, their loyalty firmly with Ford, who shook his head, a bitter smile curling his lips. "You just can't stop, can you? You think this is a game, but you're digging your own grave." Ford turned to the audience, his arms outstretched, his voice rising. "This guy makes his living tearing people apart. My wife, my life, my work. He thinks it's all a punchline. You okay with that?" The crowd answered with a deafening cheer, their applause shaking the studio, a tidal wave of support that left Kimmel visibly shaken. Kimmel, his confidence crumbling, slammed his hand on the desk, his voice shrill. "You don't get to lecture. Me, Ford. You're a guest here, not a preacher. You don't like it? There's the door." He pointed stage left, his finger trembling, but Ford didn't budge. Instead, he crossed his arms, his stance rooted, his voice steady as steel. "You want me gone? Fine. But I'm not leaving because you say so. I'm leaving because I'm done wasting my time on a coward who can't face a real man." The audience erupted again, their cheers a thunderclap as Ford turned, not toward the exit, but toward them, his eyes scanning the crowd, connecting with their anger, their respect. Kimmel, desperate to reclaim control, shouted, "Yeah, run away, Harrison. Go cry to your wife." But the words fell flat, drowned by the crowd's roar. Ford paused, his back to Kimmel, his shoulders tense, and for a moment everyone wondered if he'd turn back and end this with more than words. The stage was a battlefield, and Ford was winning without throwing a punch. Harrison Ford stood frozen for a moment, his back to Jimmy Kimmel, the crowd's cheers washing over him like a tidal wave. Their voices filled the studio, a chorus of support that drowned out Kimmel's weak attempt to claw back control. Ford turned slowly, his eyes burning with a fire that hadn't dimmed, locking onto Kimmel, who sat slumped behind his desk, his face a mix of defiance and defeat. "You're done, Jimmy," Ford said, his voice steady, carrying the weight of a man who'd fought bigger battles than this, and won. "You think you can tear people down and walk away clean? Not tonight. Not with me." The audience roared, louder, their applause a living force, shaking the stage. A man in the second row pumped his fist, shouting, "Tell him, Harrison!" while others joined in, their voices blending into a wall of sound that left Kimmel nowhere to hide. Kimmel, his hands trembling on the desk, tried one last jab, his voice shrill and unsteady. "You're making a scene, Ford. This is my stage, my rules. You're just an old man throwing a tantrum." But the words sounded hollow, like a child's taunt in a grown man's fight. The crowd booed, their disapproval a sharp rebuke, and Ford shook his head, his smile cold and unyielding. "Your stage? Look around, Jimmy. This ain't your stage anymore. It's theirs." He gestured to the audience, who erupted again, their cheers a thunderous wave that seemed to shake the very walls. Kimmel's eyes darted to the crowd, then to the producers, who stood frozen off stage, their headsets dangling, unable to stop, the train wreck unfolding before them. Ford took a step toward the desk, his voice dropping to a piercing whisper. "You mocked my wife, my life, my work. You thought I'd sit there and take it. But I'm not your punching bag. I'm Harrison. Ford, and I don't bend for cowards like you." The crowd was on its feet now, a sea of clapping hands and shouting voices, some chanting Ford's name like a victory cry. Kimmel, his face flushed with humiliation, tried to laugh it off, but the sound was brittle, forced. "You're ridiculous, Harrison. Go back to your movies. This is real life." Ford's laugh was sharp, cutting through the noise. "Real life? You wouldn't know real life if it slapped you. You sit here night after night, picking at people's scars for laughs. I've lived a life you can't even dream of, and I'm proud of every damn second of it." He turned to the audience again, his arms wide, his voice rising. "You want to know what makes a man? It's not this," he said, pointing at Kimmel's desk. "It's standing up for what matters. For your family, your honor, yourself." The crowd exploded, their cheers so loud the cameras shook, capturing every moment of Kimmel's downfall. Ford straightened, his gaze sweeping the room one last time, then fixed on Kimmel, who looked small, deflated, a man who'd lost his own game. "I'm done here," Ford said, his voice final, authoritative. "You're not worth another word." With that, he turned and walked off the stage, his boots echoing in the sudden hush before the audience erupted again, their applause following him like a hero's send-off. Kimmel sat alone, his smile gone, his hands still, as the crowd's cheers for Ford drowned out the show's theme music. The cameras stayed on him, catching every second of his silence, his defeat etched in his slumped shoulders. Backstage, Ford didn't look back. He'd said his piece, defended his life, and walked away taller than ever. The audience kept cheering long after he was gone, their voices a testament to a man who'd faced a bully and won, not with fists, but with truth. Kimmel's show would go on, but that night it was Harrison Ford who owned the stage, and nobody would forget it.